The devil is in the detail. So before we start, I want to show you guys some of my work I did in Mill. All right, so this is a recent work I did. It's a likeness of a Canadian actor. If you know me, I'm super fascinated with CG human or realistic human. This is another work I just finished based on the concept. Okay. All right. So the devil is in the detail. Okay. So we can summarize the whole presentation in one sentence. Nothing is perfect in the real world, okay? And I'll explain it in a bit. So I know many of you are architects here and or have architectural background just like me. As architect, we always try to push the boundary, right? We like to make something structurally challenged. Like we want to make that perfect structure or that perfect form, right? So the problem here is it takes a lot of resource, extreme engineering and all this thing, right? So if, if it was up to us, half of the building probably would have been floating right now, but the structure engineer and the gravity don't share the sense of humor that we do, right? So that's a lot of work. So that's this kind of challenge we face as an architect. Then when we go and design an interior, there are different challenges, like we want to have that perfect workmanship and challenges like that. But then we come to CG world, our challenges are completely different here. We can build something perfect, right? We can create a structure that could float in the space. We can create the perfect surface which has the perfect reflection, and that's our challenge here, because the more perfect it is, it doesn't look realistic, right? We can see, look at this render here, which is not a bad render, but it doesn't look realistic because the reflection is too perfect. You can look at the floor, the kitchen top, it's too clean. And in real world, we're never gonna see something like this. So our eye could immediately tell that this is not a real picture or anything like that, right? So that's our challenge when it comes to 3D, that perfection that ruins everything for us, okay? This little guy, it's interesting to me because it's a, the mantis shrimp has the most complex eye in the nature, okay? It has 12 photoreceptors and it can see way more color than we do, okay? But we should not underestimate our eyes either. Our eyes are actually more powerful than we realize. A simple example, the highest resolution camera you can buy in the market right now is 150 megapixel. And if our eyes were to be a digital camera, it would be like 576, which is way, way powerful than the most powerful camera we have right now, okay? So we can see all the tiny details, but we just don't realize it, okay? And we can differentiate our eye, and our brain could differentiate a fake from a real object. So how do we achieve that realism in our render, right? So the answer to this question is the devil is in the detail. We have to understand the detail on the surface, okay? So we need to look at all the surface. When we build in a CG world, we need to study, we need to look at all this reference. We have to see how the surface works, okay? So I'm gonna show you guys some examples, okay? So you can look at this picture. It's, I mean, she has fairly nice skin right now, right? If we zoom in, what's gonna happen? I hope you guys are not having your dinner right now. So let's zoom in. So the more we zoom in, we can see more details. We can see some dead skin there. We can see some hair. We can see some different marks here. So it's completely different from this distance we were looking at her skin. So it's just a regular skin. All of us, we have this kind of details around the eye area. We can see all the bumpiness, and then we can see all the veins and all sort of details we have on our skin. And we can see how translucent our skin is. Okay, so I have another example. So this is just an IKEA tool I have. It's made out of bamboo. And you can see it's a fairly nice and clean surface. And I put my planter on this, so it got a little bit of watermark around it. But it's a fairly nice and clean, like workmanship is pretty nice. So they use modern tools, and you can see the surface is getting that little bit of reflection there because it's fairly clean. But then I have another tool, which is 150 years old, made out of reclaimed wood. Okay, and you can see the surface detail here, like all these different marks over time. It got some like different marks there, some black patches, some white marks there, and that makes it so much interesting, right? Then one of my favorite material is polished concrete. But you can see the polished concrete, I mean, the name suggests it's not polished at all. It looks polished, but there's so much details on the surface. It changes color in different places, then the reflection is different. And based on how it's made, you can see some of these are a little bit matte, some polished concrete could be more glossy, but still it's gonna get some waviness. So you can see the reflection is kind of breaking up there, right? So we need to look for this kind of detail in the real world in order to make something more realistic in CG. We have to understand how different surface works, right? Then I have another simple example. Whenever we look at all the glasses, we can see if you have your phone right next to you, you can see the how many fingerprints you have on your phone, no matter how new it is. As soon as you use it, you're going to put some fingerprints on it. You're going to get some dust and all sort of like scratches on it, and it's going to change the surface quality. It's going to change how the surface reacts to the light. Okay, so we need to understand all these details happening around us to use that in our CG render. So these are some scans, 3D scans I have. On the left one, you can see this is just a regular concrete block. And although it looks a simple block, but it has so much detail. And there are different kind of details. On the corner, you can see there's some chipped part. And on the side, you can see the noisy area. Then there's another simple details there, all sort of stuff going on. Then the middle one is a concrete column, but it's completely different from that concrete block there. It's getting all this different surface. The surface is fairly smooth here, but it's getting all this impression from the metal framing. You can see some bump there, some interesting thing happening, some scratches there. Then on the right side, you see there is a wooden beam there, right? So there are like two different beams and they are completely different. Their surface quality is different because the type of wood. One, it has a nice texture going on. The top one, the bottom one is more plain, but it has all the cracks. So all sort of details actually make the difference. That makes it more realistic. All these details are all the time happening on the surface. Uh, so how do we get all these details in our render? Okay. So we use a process called, or a workflow called physically based render, or in shortcut PBR. All right. So what PBR does, it consider all this real physics in the render. Okay. So we know, like, when a light ray bounces on a surface, it reflects in 90°, but it only going to happen if the surface is perfectly straight. Okay. But as we said, nothing is perfect in the real world. The surface we look at and think it's plane, it's not perfectly plane. So what's going to happen? The light is going to fall on the surface, it's going to bounce, and it's going to scatter. So we're never going to get that perfect reflection. And based on different surface, it's going to work differently. If it's a translucent surface, the light is going to travel inside. It's going to bounce multiple times, and then it's going to travel outside. So all sort of thing happens in real world. And the physically based render, I consider all this thing to make our render more realistic. Okay. So next question is, how do we use physically based render? How does it work? So if we have a surface, we're going to ask all this question before we start. What's the color of the surface? Okay, so that's the first question. The interesting fact is the color we see of anything is not the actual color, not the accurate color of something, because it's getting the reflection, it's getting all sort of surface quality, so it's changing the color a little bit. Okay, so we have to consider that. The next thing is if it's a metallic or non-metallic object. Like if it's a plastic, it's not metal. If it's a glass, it's not metal. But if it's iron, if it's aluminum, it's going to be a metal object, right? Then we consider if the surface is glossy or non-glossy. Okay, so if it's a glass, it's going to have glossiness. If it's a plastic, most likely it's going to have glossiness. But if it's a concrete, it's not going to have glossiness. Like a regular concrete, it's not going to have glossiness. Then we also ask if it's a rough surface or not a rough surface. So same thing, concrete, most likely going to have a rough surface. Glass or plastic or those polished kind of surface is not going to have roughness. The next question we ask if it's a transparent or translucent surface. Like glass is a transparent surface, but then our skin, plastic, wax, these are translucent surface. Then another question we ask is how the surface detail is. Okay. So if we look at wood, it's going to have one kind of surface detail. Then if we look at concrete, it's going to have a different kind of surface. If we look at our skin, it has different kind of like bumps. It has all sort of wrinkles and stuff like that. Okay, so before we start or making all this rendering, we go through all these questions and try to figure out how the surface is. Then there's an example here. You can see on the top left, we have a metal shader. Okay, so in order to create that metal shader, we're gonna feed all these different maps. Okay, the first one you can see color map. So you can, as I said, the color is not going to look exactly same as the final object because it's getting all the reflection and light bounce and all this kind of things happening. So it's going to change the surface quality or the color. So we give the true color of the object in the color section. Then we feed another map, which is called metalness map. So if it's a metal object, it's going to be white. If it's a non-metallic object, it's going to be black. So we're telling the render engine that it's a metal or non-metal. Okay, so this case, this is a metal. So you can see the map is mostly white, but the area where it's getting those rust, it's darker because these parts are not gonna be as metallic as the other part. Then we have roughness map, which is telling if the surface is rough or not very rough. So definitely same things happening here. the rusty area is going to be rough. So we're telling our render engine that these areas are going to be rough and the rest of the areas are going to be more smooth. Then we have another map we use called displacement map that actually tells the render engine which areas are going to have bump or all sort of details. If you have scratches or if we have some sort of micro surface detail, it's going to show up all these details with this map. Then we have another map we can use. It's called normal map, which is a cheaper version of displacement map. And in game, they use this normal map a lot because it's a little bit cheaper to use. That takes less render time. So yeah, sometimes game, but in VFX, we mostly use displacement map. So that's how we built shader. This is like a super simplified example. In production, it could go like way more complex, but that's the basic idea of physically based rendering. Okay, so I have a simple example here. Let's say we want to design a house in Old Dhaka, and we want to add some of the props from there, like a pottery, because it's very popular there, right? You can buy all these nice pots there. So if we need to design a place and we want to put like some sort of pottery there, so how do we render this? So, let's say we have a model like this. Then we're going to take that model in a software like Substance Painter. So we want to add some details. So definitely the clay is going to have all this mark. So we're going to add a texture that's going to create details. Then we want to add the color, which is going to show what kind of color we want. Then definitely they're going to have some surface imperfection because it's never going to be perfect. To make it a little bit more realistic, we can add some of the micro details like this one. And then you can see some of the pottery, they use some sort of coating like this. So we can use a coating like that to make it a little bit more interesting. And then we can add additional spots. So that, because definitely the surface is going to get a lot of variations like this. So we can add one layer of details. And then finally we can add some sort of design they might paint on that surface. So then if we want, we can keep painting additional detail, and you can see the color area is getting a little bit of thickness, and that's what's going to happen in real world because the paint is going to have a little bit of thickness too. And so we want to consider every single thing, every single details it's going to happen in the real world, and we want to use this in CG. Okay, so there's another way we can translate a 3D object, real life object into 3D. Let's think about a different scenario. Let's say you're designing a resident or a public building, and you have a sculpture that you want to put in the backyard or somewhere in the building, right? A big one. So that sculpture is very unique. So what you can do, you can take pictures from different angles, and you can feed it to a software like Reality Capture, and that's gonna generate 3D for you. Okay, so that's what I did with this tool I have. I took pictures from all the different angles and then feed it to 3D scanning software. There are different ways you can do 3D scanning. There are different technologies like there are more accurate technologies called LiDAR. What we used in VFX, like if we had to build a whole city block, they are gonna go and use LiDAR to scan the whole city block. But smaller object, we can just do the photogrammetry and take different pictures and feed it to a software, and that's gonna create this object like that. So the only downside of having something like this is to, uh, we need to clean up uh, some of this. You can see I have a stand here, and the stand came up with this model. So, and then we take it to ZBrush, a sculpting software like this, and then we clean it up, and you can see it's going to create some holes. So we just have to go there and clean up all this. So here you can just see the surface. So we can bring it in ZBrush, and we can actually do, we can add all the additional detail if we want to. But this is a very useful process if you have an object already, you have that object or that sculpture or any kind of thing. Okay, so finally, I want to show you guys one of the projects I worked on. So this is a CG car, and you can kind of get the idea how we work in VFX. And this car, which is a brand new one, we used a lot of details on this. It's not going to show up. It's not going to show up all these details, but you know, there's tiny details, that 2% details, that makes the whole difference. That makes a CG object make more realistic. We have raindrops, we have some watermark, we have some scratches, everything going on this new car. So let's watch this. All right, I don't know if you have noticed, but some of the trees there were fake. Okay, they were CG too. All right, cool. So I hope that kind of makes sense, the process of detailing, how we add all the details on a surface.